Continuing from the previous discussion on the importance of early disclosure to avoid implied agency, it is essential to understand that representation and compensation are two entirely separate concepts in Arizona real estate law. Many new licensees, and even some experienced ones, mistakenly assume that receiving compensation automatically establishes an agency relationship, or that lack of payment removes fiduciary duties. However, Arizona law makes a clear distinction between whom a licensee represents and who actually pays the licensee. Misunderstanding this distinction can lead to ethical violations, disciplinary action by the Arizona Department of Real Estate, ADRE, and even civil liability under Arizona Revised Statutes, Section 322153A3. Representation in real estate refers to the fiduciary relationship between the licensee and their client. This relationship is established through an express agreement, typically a written employment contract, such as a listing agreement ARS Section 32-215, 1.02a, or buyer-broker agreement in accordance with R4-2 8-1101F. Once representation is established, the licensee owes the client fiduciary duties, including loyalty, obedience, disclosure, confidentiality, accounting, and reasonable skill and care. These duties exist regardless of whether compensation is ever received. Representation defines who the licensee advocates for, who receives their loyalty, and whose interests they must protect throughout the transaction. Compensation, on the other hand, refers to the payment the licensee earns for performing licensed real estate activities. Compensation may come from various sources, not necessarily from the party the licensee represents. According to ARS Section 32-2155A, a real estate licensee may only receive compensation through their employing broker and only from parties authorized under the contract. This means that even if a buyer's agent receives payment from the seller through the MLL or another brokerage, the agent's fiduciary duty remains solely with the buyer, not with the party providing the payment. The law separates compensation from representation to protect the integrity of fiduciary duties and to ensure that payment does not influence loyalty or advocacy. To illustrate, consider a common Arizona scenario. A buyer's agent represents a purchaser under a written buyer-broker agreement. The buyer's offer on a property used to include a seller-paid commission through the MLS co-broke arrangement. That is not how it works now. The buyer must request that the seller pays the buyer's commission on the seller compensation addendum. Although the agent's compensation is derived from the seller's funds, their fiduciary loyalty remains with the buyer. The agent must negotiate terms that favor the buyer and disclose all material facts impacting the buyer's decision, even if doing so may result in less compensation. This principle upholds the agent's ethical obligation under R4-28-1101A to deal fairly and honestly with all parties, while maintaining undivided loyalty to their client. Note that the seller is not obligated to pay the buyer's agent any compensation. It is all negotiable now. Conversely, a listing agent represents the seller but may agree to share part of the commission with a cooperating buyer's broker. That cooperating broker, though paid indirectly from the seller's proceeds, still represents the buyer exclusively. The payment is a contractual arrangement between the seller and the buyer's brokers, not an indication of who is represented. Arizona courts have long affirmed this separation. The listing agreement does not include anywhere that the seller agrees to pay the buyer's agent a specific amount, but only that the owner gives the listing agent authority to say that the seller is willing to potentially compensate the buyer's agent. In Lombardo v. Albu, 1996, the Arizona Court of Appeals clarified that payment of a commission does not by itself establish agency. What matters is the presence or absence of an agreement of representation, not the flow of money. The importance of this distinction also extends to dual and limited representation. In cases where the same brokerage represents both buyer and seller, written consent from both parties is required before proceeding to write an offer. The consent to limited representation form makes it clear that although the broker may receive compensation from both sides, their role is to facilitate the transaction rather than advocate exclusively for either party. This aligns with the disclosure obligations under R4-28-1101F, which emphasize transparency regarding relationships and compensation. Disclosure obligations go beyond identifying representation. They also include informing all parties about how compensation is structured. For example, if a licensee is receiving a bonus or incentive for closing a particular property, they must disclose this in writing to their client before the transaction closes. This ensures compliance with ARS Section 32-2153, open parenthesis, 10 close parenthesis, and 32-2155, open parenthesis, D close parenthesis, which prohibits any licensee from accepting or giving compensation without full disclosure to all parties involved. Transparency about compensation protects consumers from potential conflicts of interest and maintains the credibility of the profession. Consider a scenario where a builder offers a $5,000 incentive to buyer's agents for selling new homes in a subdivision. If a buyer's agent shows those homes to their client without disclosing the incentive, the agent risks violating Arizona's disclosure requirements. The agent's loyalty could appear compromised because their financial gain might influence their recommendations. Proper disclosure eliminates that appearance of impropriety and ensures compliance with both statute and rule. Furthermore, designated brokers have supervisory responsibility under R4-28-1103A to ensure that all compensation arrangements are fully disclosed, properly documented, and consistent with written agreements. Brokers must also ensure that no licensee under their supervision receives or pays compensation directly to another party without going through the brokerage. This maintains the lawful flow of funds and reinforces broker oversight. Review summary. Representation and compensation are legally distinct concepts in Arizona real estate. Representation defines fiduciary loyalty and arises from a written agreement under R4-28-1101, while compensation is simply the payment for services rendered, governed by ARS Section 32-2155A. An agent's fiduciary duties are owed only to the party they represent, regardless of who provides the payment. Disclosure obligations require agents to inform all parties of representation relationships and compensation arrangements, ensuring transparency and preventing conflicts of interest. Case law, Realty Executives, Incor ver Northrop, King and Crean, 24 Arizona Appeals 400, 1975. Reinforces that commission payment does not create agency. Early and clear disclosure remains essential for ethical practice and compliance with ADRE regulations. Agency requires consent and control, not merely payment. The court emphasized that an agency relationship arises only when one party manifests assent that another will act on its behalf and subject to its control, and the other consents to do so. Discussion: why is compensation not the same as representation in Arizona real estate? Answer: because representation determines fiduciary duties, while compensation is simply payment for services. An agent can be paid by one party, but owe loyalty and fiduciary duties to another. What must a licensee do if they receive a financial incentive or bonus from a third party related to a transaction? Answer: they must disclose the incentive in writing to their client before the transaction closes to comply with R4-28-1101G. Why must all compensation flow through the employing broker? Answer: to ensure compliance with ARS Section 322155A. maintain proper supervision, and prevent unauthorized payments or ethical conflicts. Closing remarks. The distinction between representation and compensation is one of the most fundamental, yet frequently misunderstood concepts in real estate. A professional agent must never let financial gain influence loyalty, judgment, or ethical responsibility. Arizona law ensures that while compensation is negotiable, fiduciary duties are not. Maintaining transparency about who you represent and how you are compensated reinforces trust, integrity, and compliance, the foundation of every successful and lawful real estate practice.